My name is Veronica Steele. I'm 49 years old, and for nearly 2 decades I was known as the Queen of Casinos in Las Vegas. It's not a title I invented. Forbes dubbed me that in 2018, when my entertainment conglomerate exceeded $14 billion in market value. I moved billions of dollars every month, had politicians in my pocket, movie stars at my disposal, and an empire that kept growing. To many, I was the personification of the American dream, an immigrant's daughter who reached the top. To others, I was feared, admired, envied. My signature on a contract could transform careers or destroy them in seconds. Nothing happened on the Strip without my knowledge or approval. When I walked through the golden halls of my casinos, people moved aside as if I were royalty. But on an ordinary December night, 3 words spoken by a simple cleaning lady shattered all my certainties. 3 words that opened wounds I had been hiding behind luxury and began the journey that would change absolutely everything: my faith, my future, and even my identity. Before you think this is just another motivational story about finding purpose, let me be clear. What I'm going to share isn't about success, money, or achievements. It's about being found when you didn't even know you were lost. Before continuing with my story, I want to pause to connect with you who are watching. Write in the comments where you're watching this video from. São Paulo, Lisbon, Dubai, Ottawa. I want to know how far this story is reaching. I've been receiving messages from people in the most unexpected places, including many who, like I once was, live surrounded by everything yet feel empty inside. If you identify with this, know that this video was made especially for you. I also want to thank each person who has shared my testimony. True success isn't in numbers, but in each heart that finds peace through this journey I'm about to share. Let's go back a few years. In 2009, at 33, I took control of the casino network my ex-husband had started. When we divorced, many bet that I would sell everything and move on with my life. No one imagined that in 5 years I would triple the size of the company. My routine was frantic: casinos, resorts, luxury hotels. I had an entire department just to manage my properties around the world. One of my assistants exclusively took care of my 3 private jets. Another assistant only coordinated my social event calendar. Mansions on 3 continents, jewelry showcases, and endless parties with people who would pay fortunes just to be seen at my side. But here's something few knew. On the outside, I was a symbol of absolute power, but inside, there were nights when I cried alone, suffocated by the silence of my penthouse. After everyone left, the security guards, the assistants, the guests, there remained only a middle-aged woman looking out the window, surrounded by the artificial glow of a city that never sleeps. In meetings, I was relentless. At parties, I was the center of attention. But in the solitude of my room, one question always haunted me. Is this it? Everything I had achieved, the money, the power, the respect, the fear I inspired, seemed superficial when I had no one to genuinely share it with. I tried to fill that void in every possible way. Empty relationships that lasted weeks, trips to exotic destinations that quickly became boring, compulsive purchases of objects that lost their charm as soon as they were delivered. I even tried to find meaning in philanthropic causes, but soon realized I was using charity more as a shield for my public image than out of real compassion. My therapist diagnosed depression and anxiety. He prescribed pills that I religiously took before every important meeting. My personal trainer promised that daily exercises would bring mental balance. My nutritionist swore that a balanced diet would improve my mood. I spent fortunes on spiritual retreats in isolated mountains, guided meditation sessions with famous gurus, ancient rituals conducted by shamans. Nothing worked. The emptiness persisted. "You have everything anyone could wish for," they said, and I smiled, agreeing. But my heart knew something fundamental was missing. I simply didn't know what. And more importantly, I didn't want to admit it. The nights were the worst. Silence amplified my thoughts, doubts, regrets. Memories I tried to suppress during the day came back with full force. The disappointed look on my father's face when I announced I would work in casinos, the last conversation with my mother before her death, the unfulfilled promises, the relationships I sacrificed for success, the people I hurt along the way. To combat insomnia, I developed a habit: walking the corridors of my own casinos during the early hours, not as the owner, but as a ghost. Without makeup, in simple clothes, observing life happening in a world I had created but didn't really feel part of. It was during one of these night walks that everything changed. It was almost 3 a.m. on a Wednesday in December. The temperature in Las Vegas had dropped dramatically, and a rare light rain was falling outside. I had just left an exhausting meeting with Japanese investors interested in expanding our business model to Tokyo. After 5 hours discussing financial projections, contracts, and regulations, my head was throbbing. Before continuing, I wanted to mention that during this period, I learned that Allah asks us to take care not only of faith, but also of the body He has entrusted to us. For this reason, I want to recommend something that might help, a practical guide on healthy living, which includes how to maintain discipline, energy, and balance. And as an additional gift, this material also brings a special guide on ruqya and spiritual protection, to strengthen not only the body, but also the heart. Instead of going up to my suite, I decided to walk through the less crowded corridors of the Diamond Palace, my most luxurious casino. I knew every inch of that place. After all, I had personally supervised every detail of the decoration, from the crystal chandeliers to the carpets imported from Turkey. The VIP area was practically empty at that hour. Just a few persistent players, those who have no sense of time or prefer the quieter atmosphere of early morning. The ambient music, normally loud and vibrant, was at reduced volume. The clinking of chips and the discreet sound of machines created a familiar and, in a way, comforting symphony. That's when I saw her, a middle-aged cleaning lady, with a worn uniform, her graying hair carefully covered by a discreet scarf. She was collecting forgotten glasses and papers from one of the blackjack tables. Her movements were precise, efficient, almost like a silent dance. The badge on her blouse indicated the name Amina. On any other day, I probably wouldn't have even noticed her presence. Employees like her were invisible in the casino ecosystem, necessary pieces, but rarely recognized. However, something in the way she worked, with silent dignity, captured my attention. I approached quietly, watching. That's when I noticed her lips moving slightly, as if reciting something. A prayer, perhaps. A murmur so discreet that no one would notice amid the usual noise of the casino. Curious, I took a few more steps toward her. She seemed to sense my presence and raised her eyes. For a brief moment, our gazes met. There was no submission or intimidation in her eyes, only a serenity that disconcerted me. She had no idea who I was. Then, with a calm voice, almost like a prayer, she said something that froze my entire body. Allah sees everything. 3 simple words, spoken without any pretension. It wasn't an accusation or a judgment. It was just a statement, perhaps not even directed at me, but the impact they had was overwhelming. I, who controlled billions of dollars and believed myself above any judgment, be it legal, moral, or social, realized in that instant that no wealth, no power, no influence could hide me from the one who sees all things. I was paralyzed. The cleaning lady, not realizing the effect of her words, continued her work with the same silent dignity. She moved away, disappearing down the corridor that led to the service elevators. My first impulse was to follow that woman, to ask what she meant by that. But something stopped me, a mix of shame and fascination. Instead, I quickly returned to my suite on the top floor. The presidential suite at the Diamond Palace was considered one of the most luxurious in Las Vegas. 8,600 square feet of pure luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Original works of art, exclusive designer furniture, a climate-controlled wine cellar with rare labels, a private pool, a world apart, created to satisfy any material desire. That night, however, none of it brought me comfort. I dismissed the staff that was always available and stayed alone. I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. The 3 words echoed endlessly in my mind. Allah sees everything. I tried to rationalize. It was just a phrase spoken by a probably Muslim employee. Maybe it wasn't even directed at me. Maybe it was just a mantra she repeated to herself while working. But why had it affected me so much? I looked at the phone, considering calling someone to talk. But who? I had no real friends. I had partners, subordinates, flatterers, people who feared me or wanted something from me. No one with whom I could share such an intimate vulnerability. I turned on the television, trying to distract my thoughts. I flipped through channels until stopping on a documentary about Islamic architecture. The coincidence seemed strange. On the screen, impressive images of mosques around the world, golden domes, minarets reaching for the sky, intricate geometric patterns. The narration explained the search for perfection and symmetry that reflected divine order. That night, I didn't sleep. When the sun began to rise over Nevada's desert landscape, I was still awake, my mind in turmoil. The 3 words had planted a seed of doubt that was beginning to germinate. The following days were surreal. Externally, I maintained the normal routine: meetings, strategic decisions, social events. But internally, a silent revolution had begun. Allah sees everything. During meetings with investors, while we discussed methods to maximize profits, often at the expense of players' addiction, the phrase emerged like an invisible blade cutting through my peace. At parties with celebrities, while observing waste and excess, the words returned. In every obscure decision I made, in every ethical compromise I sacrificed for profits, the same memory. I tried to find the cleaning lady in the following days, but discovered she worked part-time and on alternate days. I got her address from the Human Resources Department, one of the advantages of being the owner, but something prevented me from approaching her directly. It would be invasive, and something told me she wasn't the one who had the answers I was seeking. With embarrassment at being seen, I began to research discreetly. At first, basic questions in private searches on my computer. Who is Allah? What do Muslims believe? What does Islam mean? The initial answers surprised me. I discovered that for Muslims, Allah is not a different God, but simply the Arabic name for the same God worshipped by Jews and Christians, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The same God I had superficially known in my childhood when my grandmother occasionally took me to church. I discovered that Muslims describe Allah as Al-Qadir, the all-powerful, Al-Alim, the all-knowing, Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. Attributes that made sense with the phrase that had impacted me so much. If Allah sees everything, it's because He knows everything, knows all secrets, all intentions. Something that particularly surprised me was discovering that Muslims respect and honor Jesus, called Isa in Arabic, as one of the greatest prophets, born miraculously of the Virgin Mary, Maryam. They don't consider him God or the Son of God, but a special messenger sent with a divine revelation. I was fascinated to read about Mary in the Quran, where there is an entire chapter dedicated to her. The texts describe her as a virtuous, pure woman, chosen above all women in the world for a special mission. My research continued, growing deeper. I read about the pillars of Islam, the declaration of faith, Shahada, the 5 daily prayers, Salat, fasting in the month of Ramadan, Saum, obligatory charity, Zakat, and the pilgrimage to Mecca, Hajj. Each concept seemed simultaneously strange and familiar. What impacted me most, however, was discovering that the Quran explicitly condemns many of the practices that sustained my empire: gambling, alcohol consumption, interest-bearing loans, exhibitionism, ostentatious displays of wealth. It was as if each page I read pointed directly to contradictions in my life that I had normalized. I continued my research, now with books I discreetly purchased online that arrived in unmarked packages. Muhammad, A Biography of the Prophet, by Karen Armstrong. The Road to Mecca, by Muhammad Asad. No God But God, by Reza Aslan. Biographies, conversion stories, theological explanations. 1 week turned into 2, then into a month. My assistants noticed subtle changes in my behavior. I canceled several parties. I began to dress more conservatively. I started questioning certain practices in the casinos that hadn't bothered me before. I drastically reduced my alcohol consumption. One night, browsing online, I discovered there was a mosque in Las Vegas. It wasn't a grand building like those I had seen in documentaries about Istanbul or Dubai. It was a discreet construction, almost hidden, a few kilometers from the bustle of the Strip. For 3 consecutive days, I drove there, parked across the street, and just observed. I saw men and women of different origins entering for prayers. Some women wore hijab, others didn't. Some men wore traditional clothes, others wore jeans and t-shirts. It was a diverse community. On the 4th day, I summoned my courage. I dressed simply, put a scarf on my head trying to imitate the style I had seen, and entered with my heart racing. There was a separate area for women, and I headed there, trying not to draw attention. The simplicity of the interior impressed me. No ostentation, gold, or display of wealth, just a clean space with carpets for prayers and some verses of the Quran written in Arabic calligraphy on the walls. The contrast with the casino environment could not have been greater. I sat in a corner, observing the women arriving for the Maghrib prayer, sunset. Some greeted me with a smile and a discreet "Assalamu alaikum," peace be upon you. I responded with a timid nod, feeling like an imposter. When the call to prayer, Adhan, began, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The melody, the words in Arabic, the atmosphere of devotion, everything created an experience I had never felt before. For the first time in my life, I realized a place where my money, my power, my influence made no difference at all. There, everyone was equal before Allah. I observed the prayer, trying to understand the movements, the recitations. Afterward, one of the women approached me. "First time here?" she asked with a gentle smile. I nodded, unable to hide my nervousness. "My name is Fatima. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to help." I didn't reveal who I was, of course. I said only that I was curious about Islam and wanted to learn more. Fatima suggested I talk to the imam of the mosque, who offered classes for people interested in learning about the religion. "He speaks perfect English and is very patient with questions," she assured me. I thanked her and promised to return. As I left, she handed me a small book, What Everyone Needs to Know About Islam. I returned to my world of luxury, but I was no longer the same. While signing million-dollar contracts in my office overlooking the Strip, I remembered the serenity I saw in that simple prayer room. While giving orders to hundreds of employees, I remembered the cleaning lady Amina, who with 3 words showed me a devastating truth. I wasn't free. I was a prisoner of my own empire. The following weeks were ones of deep internal conflict. On one hand, I had enormous responsibilities. Thousands of people depended on my decisions for their livelihood. Investors trusted my business judgment. On the other hand, I was beginning to question the ethical foundations of the entire gambling business. I continued visiting the mosque, increasingly frequently. I began participating in the imam's classes, a middle-aged man named Sheikh Abdullah. Born in the United States, the son of Egyptian immigrants, he had a doctorate in comparative religious studies from Harvard, in addition to traditional Islamic training obtained in Cairo. I still hadn't revealed my true identity, introducing myself only as Victoria, a businesswoman interested in learning about Islam. The classes were in groups, with other people on similar journeys of discovery. One day, after approximately 2 months of these visits, I found the courage for a private conversation. I asked Sheikh Abdullah for a few minutes after class. "Of course," he responded with a calm smile. We sat in a small room adjacent to the main prayer area. The contrast could not have been greater with the luxurious meeting rooms I was accustomed to. Simple walls, basic furniture, a shelf full of books in Arabic and English. "Sheikh, I have a confession to make," I began hesitantly. "My name is not Victoria. My real name is Veronica Steele." He maintained his serene expression, showing no recognition. "I own several casinos in Las Vegas, including the Diamond Palace." His eyes widened slightly, the only indication of surprise. "I understand. And what brought you to us, Mrs. Steele?" I told him everything. About the early morning when I heard the cleaning lady's words, about how that simple phrase had triggered an avalanche of questioning, about the emptiness I felt despite all the material success, about the conflict I now lived, between the empire I had built and the new values I was beginning to embrace. Sheikh Abdullah listened to everything attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, we sat in silence for a few moments. "Mrs. Steele, Islam teaches that each person has their own path to guidance. The Quran says, Allah guides to his light whom he wills. Sometimes a single phrase, a brief encounter, can be enough to plant the seed of faith." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The journey you describe is not uncommon. Many people reach the peak of material success only to discover that it doesn't fill the spiritual void. In Islam, we believe that this void exists because human beings were created with an innate need for connection with their Creator. But my work," I began, "my entire empire is based on things that Islam condemns: gambling, alcohol, adult entertainment. How can I reconcile this?" Sheikh Abdullah smiled gently. "Allah chooses how to touch each person's heart. Sometimes, a single phrase is enough to open the door to guidance. The rest of the path, well, That's a personal journey that each one needs to make at their own pace. These words were the confirmation I needed. It was as if he had read my soul and understood exactly what I was experiencing. What should I do now? I asked, feeling simultaneously lost and found. Continue learning, continue reflecting, and when you feel ready, the Shahada, the declaration of faith, will be here for you. There's no rush. Allah is patient. I left that conversation with a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. In the following weeks, I intensified my studies. I began learning basic Arabic to better understand the prayers. I modified my diet, eliminating pork and alcohol. I reorganized my schedule to be able to participate in the mosque classes without missing my professional responsibilities. The most difficult change, however, was in relation to my businesses. I began discreetly diversifying investments, redirecting resources to areas that didn't involve gambling or other activities prohibited by Islam. I expanded hotel and restaurant operations, which could function without the casinos. I invested in commercial real estate, technology companies, renewable energy projects. It was a slow and complex process. I couldn't simply close all the casinos overnight. Thousands of jobs were at stake, but each decision was now made with a new perspective, considering not only immediate profit, but also ethical impacts. Finally, 3 months after that fateful dawn, I felt I was ready. I sought out Sheikh Abdullah and said I wanted to pronounce the Shahada, the declaration of faith that marks conversion to Islam. The ceremony was simple. No spectacle or large audience, just a few witnesses, including Fatima, who had become a friend, and to my surprise, Amina, the cleaning lady whose words had started it all. I later discovered that Sheikh Abdullah had located and invited her, thinking her presence would be significant for me. Before these witnesses, I repeated the words that Sheikh Abdullah pronounced slowly so I could follow. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasul Allah. I testify that there is no deity except Allah, and I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. I confess I cried like I hadn't since childhood. The woman who controlled billions, who intimidated executives and politicians, who lived surrounded by luxury and power, bowed before the only true king. In that instant, the old Veronica Steele died, and a servant of Allah was born. The changes didn't stop there, of course. In the months that followed, I completed the restructuring of my businesses. I sold most of the casino operations to an international conglomerate. I kept the hotels, restaurants, and other ventures that didn't conflict with my new faith. I donated a substantial part of my fortune to charitable works, both Islamic and secular. News of my conversion eventually leaked to the press. The Queen of Casinos, who became Muslim, was an irresistible story for the tabloids. Some ridiculed my decision, calling it a spiritual midlife crisis. Others speculated about hidden motivations, absurd conspiracy theories. Few understood the depth of the transformation that had occurred, but that no longer mattered to me. For the first time in my life, I felt an inner peace that no amount of money or power had ever provided me. I began wearing the hijab in public, not out of obligation, but by personal choice. Each morning, as I placed the scarf on my head, I reminded myself of the commitment I had made, of the new identity I was building. My routine was completely reformulated. The 5 daily prayers became the pillars that structured my time. Instead of extravagant parties, I began participating in community gatherings at the mosque. Instead of compulsive shopping, I discovered the joy of helping those in need through charity, sadaqah. Some friends disappeared when I announced my conversion. Others kept their distance, uncomfortable with my new appearance and values. I wasn't surprised or resentful. They had been attracted by my power and influence, not by who I really was. In compensation, I found a new community, simple people, but of unwavering faith. Professionals, students, housewives, workers, Muslims by birth, and converts like me. A diversity I had never experienced in my former homogeneous social circle. Especially significant was my friendship with Amina, the cleaning lady whose words had changed my life. I discovered she was a widow, raising 3 children alone. She had immigrated from Morocco 20 years earlier and worked 2 jobs to support her family. Her unwavering dignity and faith, even in the face of difficulties, were a daily inspiration to me. When I experienced my first Ramadan, the sacred month of fasting, it was Amina who guided me, explaining the traditions, sharing recipes for iftar, breaking the fast, encouraging me on the most difficult days. By the end of that month, our connection had deepened into something that transcended our different social and financial backgrounds. 1 year after my Shahada, I performed Umrah, the lesser pilgrimage to Mecca. Walking around the Kaaba, the sacred sanctuary that Muslims consider the first house of worship to God built on earth, was an experience that transcended all emotions I had ever felt. Seeing millions of people of all races, nationalities, and social classes dressed equally in white, circling the same center, was a powerful metaphor for the equality that Islam preaches. There, in the heart of the Holy Land, I reflected on the incredible journey I had traveled, from a businesswoman obsessed with control and power to a woman at peace with her faith, from someone who lived to impress others to someone who sought only to please Allah. Life continues to bring challenges, of course. The business transition generated complex legal processes. Some former partners question my decisions. Media exposure is sometimes still intrusive. Occasionally, I face prejudice, both for my past and for my new faith. But none of this shakes the certainty I found. As a hadith, saying of Prophet Muhammad, says, "True wealth is not in the abundance of possessions, but in the wealth of the soul." My experience has taught me that we can spend years building material empires while neglecting what's most important: our connection with the Creator, with our true essence, with our purpose in life. If something in this story touched you, I ask you to share it, not for me, but because perhaps someone in your network is experiencing the same emptiness I felt. Perhaps someone who lives surrounded by luxury but empty inside needs to hear that Allah can transform any heart, even that of someone who believed they already had everything. Remember, sometimes just 3 words are enough to change an entire lifetime. Allah sees everything. This awareness can be frightening initially, but then it becomes the greatest possible comfort, because if He sees everything, He also sees our struggles, our attempts, our desire to improve. And as the Quran says, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:11. My change began that early morning, with 3 words that penetrated years of carefully constructed defenses. If you are on a similar journey, of any religion or without religion, know that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to seek the truth. I used to think my legacy would be the skyscrapers I built, the businesses I developed, the fortune I accumulated. Today, I hope my legacy is simply the testimony that even the most unlikely hearts can be transformed by the power of faith. The same woman who was once known as the Queen of Casinos now kneels 5 times a day, touching her forehead to the ground in submission to the Creator of the universe. And it is in this submission that I found true freedom. The Quran says, "And whoever submits himself to Allah and does good, he has surely grasped the most trustworthy handhold." Surah Luqman 31:22. This is the handhold that sustains me now. Not money, not power, not public recognition, but the certainty of being on the right path, the path back home. I thank Allah for placing Amina in my path that early morning, for allowing me to hear those 3 words when my heart was finally ready to receive them, for guiding me through darkness into light. And I thank you for listening to my story. If something here resonated with your own journey, perhaps it's not a coincidence. Perhaps it's a sign for you too to begin exploring the questions that really matter. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you.